Isn't it funny, Melissa, how our brain forms all these patterns and it believes in superstitions that just quite clearly, in the cold light of day, aren't a thing? Do you ever feel superstitious about poker? And I guess what I'd like to talk about today as well is, where do we draw the line between genuine intuitive pattern recognition and superstition? Like, where can we say we're correlating A and B for good reason, and where are we correlating them randomly? I'd love to get into this topic with you today. So why did you raise this?
Well, I raised this because I feel this a lot myself. Wouldn't call myself a superstitious person, not in the way that like I imagine some people are, but I do have moments and tendencies that I think are driven more by superstitious belief than a rational, logical belief. And I certainly have times where I feel like I'm acting in a way that I don't even realize is based on superstition. So for instance, like the last couple sessions I've sat in the one seat and I've done really well. And the other day I was going into the poker room for a session. I got my chips at the cage and I'm walking to the table and I see the one seat open and I immediately was like, yes, like this is great. Like this surge of happiness, like went through me, this kind of adrenaline just because the one seat was open. Like that's my seat. And then I sat down and I kind of got my chips out of the rack and I got myself kind of settled. And I thought, oh my God, like why am I so happy to sit here? Like, it's just a seat. Like, what am I doing? This also is something that I find myself doing if I'm not getting cards or I'm just running bad in a certain seat and then another seat opens up, I'll switch to that seat being like, okay, you need to change. And so I always think about, okay, well, there's maybe extreme examples of superstition, like people who, I don't know, like if they don't eat the exact same breakfast, then they feel like the day is doomed. Or if they don't wear the same pair of shoes or something, then, you know, they can't function. Like I would put that in the extreme category, but I think most people are probably somewhere in the middle, like me, where you have these little superstitious tics that drive your thought process in the game and some of your actions. And so, yeah, I wanted to talk about this today because I don't think it's a good thing. And I feel like it's something that I'd like to get rid of from my game, because I don't think it does me any good. And for the same reason that I personally don't, I'm not a religious person. I'm not someone that believes in kind of a spiritual world, but it like outside of poker. So I don't really see why there's a reason why I should be doing so when I'm playing poker. So yeah, so I think it'd be kind of interesting to get your take on this and to think about some ways that maybe everyone's superstitious and whether that's ever a good thing or a bad thing always.
Yeah, so do we have a spectrum here that's kind of ranging from no superstition at all, and then like borderline like obsessive compulsive disorder, kind of irrational neuroticism surrounding a kind of behavior that has no bearing on the EV outside of poker? I mean, like the life EV of a decision, but you have to do it anyway.
Yeah.
So when I was a kid,
just to be clear, like I'm not talking about people that have, you know, I think when you verge into like OC, like obsessive compulsive disorder, and maybe people that are on the spectrum, you know, with autism and things like that. I'm not talking about that. Sure. I'm talking about more like just the general kind of run of the mill poker player who says, I'm running bad in the seat, I need to move to that seat, or I don't like playing at this table because I run bad there, or I don't like playing in that room because I run bad in that room, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, totally. But I think it is all related. I know that you're not talking about that, but I like to sort of zoom out and see like what is the spectrum of the human condition, like across these data points. And yeah, when I was a kid, like I had a lot of like impulsive behaviors where I felt like things weren't going to be okay unless I did something like a certain number of times, for example. So I used to think that there were good numbers and bad numbers, and I used to think that 3 was a really good number, and I still do actually. I love 3. I'll never be able to shake off the positive connotations. So if you put me in the 3 seat at a table, I'm always going to be ecstatic about that, and I'm never going to be able to stop it because I just started doing it at like probably the age of 3, coincidentally. And then I had numbers that I hated, like 6. I fucking hated 6. Partially because I couldn't draw it properly for a while, but also because I just saw it as like a dick of a number. I just didn't like it. And it was the same with colors. It was the same with things. So I used to do things like I would have to do things 3 times, or the Holy Grail was doing things 9 times. So if I did something in 3 sets of 3, I felt like I was then protected against some kind of like bad thing that was going to happen. And I'm pleased to say I don't have this kind of obsessive compulsive tendency much in adulthood. I think it was maybe a kind of a response to an unstable and kind of unsecure childhood, basically, where like things were just all over the place and I often didn't feel that safe. So I think it was partly that. But anyway, that's an extremity, as you said. That's not like what we're dealing with. But I do think that it still illustrates nonetheless that humans have this tendency to really habitualize, what's the word I'm looking for? Is that word? Habitualize? Yeah? Safe behaviors.
I don't think so.
It's not, well, it is now, Melissa. It's a word
habitualize?
Now. It's now
No.
a word, I've decided.
Sure. Go ahead.
So we habitualize safe behavior, and when something leads to good results over and over again, we feel secure with that thing. So like my cup of coffee at the start of my day, yeah, it has practical benefits. I also just like, it's a soothing routine. It's like something like that. So whatever way you want to put it, we're always going to be drawn to things that have led to safe, pleasant, nice consequences in the past. So I don't know that that's something that we can completely stop. Maybe we can become more aware of these things. I think there might be a genuine worth to the one seat being good for you. Like it might be that because you've had positive experiences in the one seat recently, you know by sitting on a subconscious level, you know that by sitting in the one seat, it's going to make you really happy. And it did make you really happy. And that's a very beneficial mode for you to be in when you're playing poker. It's a very real prospect that being in the one seat and having that same vision of the table would just put you into a mode where you're playing your A game if you felt like you played your A game in that environment at some point in the past, right? Think about when sports teams play at home rather than away, the familiarity of that stadium and getting into their groove. Okay, they have like the fan support and stuff, but I think even during COVID, when you had lockdowns and no fans in stadiums, home teams still did better. I think there's something to like a familiarity and a comfort and stuff like that. So I don't think it's all just completely wishy-washy nonsense. I think that like, yeah, if you're doing this all the time at poker and you're like, oh, I have the Queen of Hearts. Last time I had the Queen of Hearts, I got stacked, so I'm going to fold queens. Like if you're doing something like that, that's a huge problem, obviously. But if you're just kind of like, the one seat's making me happy because I had 2 good situations, like 2 good sessions in the one seat recently, that's normal. Like I have a situational memory. Like someone says to me, do you remember when we talked about blah, blah, blah? And I'll know exactly where I was. I can picture where I was. Whenever I remember a fact that I'd forgotten for a while, I remember it simultaneously while remembering a location. That's just the way my brain works. And that kind of thing is just like innate to me. So I can totally see why your brain likes a location that brought you happiness before. And although consciously, you know, it's not like, it doesn't mean anything really, like poker-wise, it's not going to affect the cards you're dealt. There could be other benefits, and it could be like the team playing at home and just being in the place where you feel the most comfortable or something.
Yeah. I think that's true. That makes sense to me. But on the other hand, I look at it like there's routines that we do every day, like you mentioned, having, you know, your morning cup of coffee. You know, people have things that they do every morning. I don't really, I mean, I drink coffee in the morning but I'm not like a routine type person. So generally, like I've never been someone that like habitually does the same thing in the same order every day. You know, I don't like leave for work at the same time every day. I don't eat the same thing for lunch or whatever. And so I always wonder, well, why do I suddenly have this with these kind of, why am I drawn to this kind of routine when it comes to poker? And why am I changing what I normally would do? And yeah, maybe there's a situational memory attached to it, but I also feel like if I'm in the one seat and let's say I get stacked or I lose a big hand, then I think, you know, this is not supposed to happen. This is not a one seat outcome, you know? That's an kind of an extreme example, but that does go through my head. It's like, oh, the one seat is shit now. And that's one more thing to have in my mind that I feel like is, going back to the first episode that we ever did of this podcast, where we talked about shedding poker baggage. It feels like it can become the baggage that I don't need. And when I think of the best version of myself at the poker table, I think of myself as being free to the extent humanly possible of irrational thoughts and behaviors, and not to where I'm, functioning like a computer, but to where I'm not allowing these kinds of, like, I've conquered these kinds of irrational parts of myself. I don't cling to them. I don't feel a certain need for them. I can function in a way like anyone else would, that, goes to work and is faced with, various situations every day at work and does the job to the best of their ability and then goes home. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It's distracting.
Yeah.
It's like noise that isn't really real, and you wish it wasn't there because it's disrupting what you would want to be your poker routine, right? So yeah, it makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
are there any other ones, like any other things that happen, like maybe when you're playing a hand itself, like against certain, do you have like boogeyman opponents that you feel like superstitious against whenever they enter the pot or something like that, or any other things?
Oh yeah, that's happened before for sure. There's definitely a couple regs in my pool who I think, you know, I've lost to this person 3 or 4 times in a row. Every time this person always has it. These thoughts always creep up for sure. But I will say that's not as prevalent anymore, and I'm generally able to be aware of those kinds of thoughts and defeat them when it comes to specific players, just because I have a lot of confidence in my own game, and I don't feel really intimidated by anyone, and I certainly don't feel intimidated by like patterns that have happened before, but it's something that I'm aware of. I will say though that another thing we talked about in our first episode was this idea of like telling the narratives we tell ourselves at the table, and we tell ourselves these narratives because they bring us a certain comfort. It's the way that humans, our brains work in terms of recognizing patterns, recognizing narratives is all part of that. I think that is something that I also try to be aware of a lot. So like, I find myself getting superstitious or really into a narrative sometimes when like, I get into, like, let's say I've been card dead for a while and I finally get a big hand, and then, maybe I flop top pair and I find myself getting really attached to it. Like, even if externally I'm getting signals that top pair may be trash in this situation, I find myself wanting to cling to that top pair. Like, I've emerged from the desert and it's like my first glass of water, and I just like, I need to have this. And it's like, well, why am I so attached to this? And that is a trick that I think goes to, like, it's a trick that our mind plays on ourselves, as like, or at least it does for me, trying to convince myself that I really need something that I really don't need. And the reason I need that is because I've been card dead for so long. So what's the happy ending to this story? I finally get cards and I win a big pot. That's the happy ending. I've endured an hour and a half of being card dead. I've been really, disciplined about folding, and now I get my reward. And obviously poker doesn't work like that at all. So I think when the one of the dangerous sides about being superstitious is it allows our brains to get comfortable in narratives, in routines that make us feel good. It's like a kind of drug, and that drug can easily carry over. It's very addicting, and it can easily carry over into spots that are, that make us act irrationally, that make us overplay hands on the basis that we're promised something, that there's going to be some kind of cosmic justice to the world. And here we are.
Yeah. And if you think about the thought processes of some of the weakest players in your pool, like let's say like the quote unquote whales or fish or uber recreationals,
everyone else besides me,
everyone except
basically.
You. Yeah. They're all the people, all the other people except for you are the very same people that go on about narratives all the time. Like, I'm going to get off this table. I'm not getting any cards. Or since the Steelers come, like, this has happened. And of course it's you. So I would be dealt. Of course you're going to deal me kings and put an ace on the flop.
Right.
Susan, you know, like
Right.
Wendy wasn't going to do that. We're obviously in the 60s here with these names. These are like the dealers in the 60s in Vegas and Binions or something, but
Yes.
you get the point. So yeah,
Mhm.
like it seems like there's a direct correlation between like being very superstitious and then like the weaker you are at poker. But also that's how gamblers work, because with the pure game of like heads or tails, say I'm like tossing a coin and betting on it, or I'm playing like roulette or something like that, I don't have anything else to go on other than
Mm.
superstitious patterns. Like it was black last time. Last time I bet on 15, blah blah blah. It's just superstition, right? And you get those guys that sit at the roulette table writing down all the numbers so they can superstitiously look at them and then figure out
Yeah.
what's going to come next. And they kind of have to do that because there is no strategic way to play roulette. Some bets are slightly worse than others, but there's no way to beat the system or to really think in depth about the game. If you're listening to this and you think that there is, I'm really shocked that you're listening to this. But hi, welcome. It's nice to have you here, I guess. But yeah, you get the point. So
We welcome all gamblers. You don't have to be, you don't have to be a certain type of gambler.
we're very inclusive here on Poker
Yeah.
Distilled. So
Yep.
so so when a game has a lack of content, or when you don't have enough ability to be able to engage deeply in strategic content, there's an empty space. I think this is like so symbolic of like how life works. When there's an empty space, what happens? You know, if you take my job away from me, and it's like, Pete, you no longer have a job. It's like, well, shit, I better look for a job. Pete, you don't have access to the internet. You can't leave the house. You can't look for a job. You can't see your family. You don't have that. You can't see your friends. No, you can't go on. You can't play any games or read any books. You don't have any books. If you
Mhm.
take all of that away from me and you create this vortex, what happens to me? I become irrational. How rational am I 2 weeks after being in that solitary confinement in my house with nothing to do? What do I look like at the end of those 2 weeks? What's my logic like? What's my view of the world like at that point compared to what it's like now? It's really diluted, right? It's all over the place. So I think that superstition is positively correlated with not having any other content in your mind. And the reason that you're getting less and less superstitious as a poker player, Melissa, is probably that you're getting better at poker and you're now able to think more things, and you have a full and rich strategic web of ideas now that you can draw upon. And I think that as you improve that more and more, like the superstitious stuff will go away a bit. But I totally agree. Like maybe it's good to address the most harmful superstitious behaviors and like try to eradicate them. So, what is it that you feel like you're doing on a regular basis that is most disturbing to you or disruptive to your game? Like what elements of this are the most major cases, would you say?
Um, well, I think it's what I mentioned earlier, which is like an irrational attachment to spots that if I was thinking rationally, would avoid, or I would know I was not good.
Right.
Investing in pots that are negative EV out of some fear of, you know, or some attachment to the pot, to the money in the middle, a desperation. I think we've talked about this before, but like I have this kind of loud, desperate, angry child that like
Yeah.
is like, I'm always aware of, and like I look at it, I'm aware of this tendency in myself, and um most days I can keep it under control, but actually like it creeps up in ways that sometimes I don't even realize it's happening until the turn or the river, or some weird spot, like, or some situation like that where it feels like, oh my God, what am I doing here? What am I doing in this pot? Like I don't belong here. Um so I think that's the most destructive part of this thinking for me when it comes to kind of the general superstition about like wanting to sit in the one seat, or not wanting to play with certain people, or feeling like a certain dealer always, like is terrible for me. I don't think that's as destructive because I'm more aware of how irrational it is,
Mm-hmm.
because I can recognize it immediately as being irrational. It's not so disguised. Um, so I think that when those things do happen, I mean, there's times when I'm able to kind of pull myself out of it, but I definitely have had times where like a couple weeks ago, I had like was having a bad session, and like every single time this one dealer sat down, I was getting coolered. And I remember saying to him, like, you're terrible for me. Colin. And like it made me feel really bad because not only is Colin like the nicest guy in the world and a friend of mine, but like I never ever ever say anything to dealers like that. Like I'm just like that's just never been, that's like one of the things I don't do on my hierarchy of behaviors. That's like at the top of like never like giving dealers shit. And the fact that I did that, and I'm saying it now, the tone I'm saying it now is much lighter than and much more friendlier than I said it. I was much sharper and kind of bitchier about it when I said that to him. And he was really professional and just kind of just, I think he just ignored me, which was probably the best thing. But I think that when these little superstitions get out of control, I think they cause me to behave in ways that I regret, and not just how I play, but generally how I act. I don't think I'm a mean person, and I'm certainly not anyone that's ever like berated someone, but I definitely can be, visibly angry at the table. I can let my emotions show in a way that I feel is sometimes unprofessional and sometimes, and honestly negative EV, because it makes people, I think, a little bit more, it puts people more on edge when they play with me. And it maybe causes people to play better than they normally would. So
yeah, it sort of wakes them up a little bit and makes them try harder against you or something. Yeah, but
yeah, it just makes them aware that I'm not like, the worst is when I will say something like, like, I don't think I've ever said something like, I can't believe you called there, but like I'll say things like, yeah, that was a good call, and like it was clearly in my tone of voice, like I was like, no, that was a terrible call. Or like one time I said, I think I really like my bluff. I don't like your call. And he was like, well, that's obvious.
Yeah, that's like the real hurt reg thing to say. Like, I like my play, I don't like your play. You didn't deserve to win the pot. Yeah, I agree that we should aim not to do that. But hey, I do a lot of stuff like that myself. Not so much at the poker table, but certainly inside my head. Like, if you could listen to my narrative when I'm playing a game of chess, like a competitive game of chess over the board, at times it's just like, you absolute fucking shit. Why do you always do this to yourself? And here you are suffering once again because of your own choices. How many times have you seen this pattern? Look at this guy. This guy's now going to beat you. He doesn't deserve to. And it's like this, and it goes on and on and on. So like we can go on these monologues in our heads, but yeah. Okay, so let's actually address what's going on here then. So in these moments where, let's use the Colin example. So your card dead, or you're getting coolered. Colin comes on the table, you get coolered, he goes away, someone else comes on shift, you don't, he comes back, you get coolered. What you're really expressing there is the pain and unhappiness of getting coolered, and then your brain is going, correlation, Colin, coolered. And then it's going, I express anger at correlation immediately. It's almost like you're so desperate to blame anything for what's going on, that Colin, because he vaguely is related to this pattern, there's like this correlation, not cause, but this correlation there. Mistaking correlation for cause is often done when people are very desperate to express something or to blame something on someone. So I think there it's just that like the willpower has been depleted, and now this pattern is recurred. You've just been coolered recently. Colin's come on the table. You probably lost a pot quite recently, or you're in quite a bad place there, right? You're not going to have like rebounded at that point when you say that. And then the brain goes straight to that like caveman kind of A and B, therefore B is caused by A, like that kind of logic. And I can think of loads of times that I do that in life where it's like, I'm actually mad because I'm hungry and something when I had a bad day, but then like the little black and white cat has disappeared, and I know it'll be in like one of two places, but I'll get this like obsessive, like annoyed, like, of course he's now disappeared because I'm having a bad day, and now I'm gonna like find him to make sure he's not outside. I'm gonna go around my house finding him until and I won't be okay until I find him. Like absurd shit like that, where I'm just correlating the way I'm feeling with one thing that sometimes bothers me a little bit, and then I'm making it like this massive deal. So I feel like you probably noted, oh, Colin run bad, like a few times subconsciously. You didn't really process it, and then this is you like desperately processing it because you need some outlet. You need like something to blame, even if it's like an absurd thing. I do it with inanimate objects. Like I can't get the microwave to do what I want. This hasn't actually happened, right? I'm just making up examples. And instead of being like, I am annoyed at how bad I am at using the microwave, or I'm annoyed that I don't have the instruction manual for the microwave, I'll like go on a tirade and I'll be like, stupid piece of shit, like made to be difficult. The people who make these are trying to make me suffer. Like it's their fault. They're stupid and they're incompetent. And it'll be like this kind of thing. So I think it's a really, really natural thing to blame. Highest order thing we can blame when we're upset is another human. If we can blame another human, that is the most satisfying thing, because that's like the biggest threat to us is actually other people, like very often. So we scour them as threats, as a higher place in the hierarchy of threats that we would scour like inanimate things. So we're always trying to blame people. That's one thing. Because we feel silly, like blaming just chance or blaming like inanimate things. That feels dumb. It's like, how can I be mad at an unconscious microwave that can't think or make any decisions? So I think that's a bit of what's going on. And I think most of it's just normal. It's like you've exhausted your willpower. Let's go to the case now where you were card dead for a while and you just came out of the desert. You were dealt ace queen. You flop was queen 6-6. You see about the flop. It went raise call behind you and someone led the turn for pot and a 5. And you're like, shit. Someone probably has a 6 here, like someone probably has trips here, but I no longer have the willpower to turn down the chance of this drudgery ending. I now need the drudgery to end more because I've endured it for so long that my willpower is gone. And it's like, well, of course your more irrational behaviors start coming in when your willpower is gone. So a lot of what you're telling me here, I can see exactly why it happens, but I'm kind of just like, well, that's what it is to be human. And to have low willpower in one moment, you're not going to be able to react in as good of a way. Like the goal of being really polite and nice to people at all times, to me, I would find that quite impossible. But maybe for you, it's easier. But yeah, I mean, I don't think it sounds like anything more than just poker kicks you when you're down. It puts you in a spot where you're desperate and you're depleted of willpower. And in those moments, you're going to make the worst decisions. You're going to do the stupidest things. You're going to make the most mistakes. The best solution is to be aware of it and find a way to bring yourself out of it. Taking breaks always helps. But sometimes it's just a case of like, you shouldn't be playing that session right now. That's sometimes the answer.
Right. There was something I saw on Twitter and I forgot who put it up, but it was, I think he's a coach, but he's a professional player to coach. And he put up, like he used the amount of profit that he made in 1 year of playing, and kind of showed mathematically how the variance basically over the course of a year and the amount of sessions he played, and basically came to the conclusion, like, even though I profited this year, and it wasn't like an insane amount of profit. It was like what maybe would be like a normal year for like a professional player that was like a solid player, and maybe like 60 or 50 or 60K or something. And he was like, I profited this much this year. Here's all the days I lost, or here's all the days that I lost. And then here's the days that I won. And like over the course of a year, like there was more days that he had lost. And as he put it, like more bad days, just looking at the numbers, than good days. Right. And he said that, most people don't think about how, you're going to a job. Every day you go to that job is not going to be a good day. You're not going to have like a string of like wonderful days where you come in and like, your boss is like, I've decided to give you a raise, or I'm moving you to, a better office, or like, you did a wonderful job on that project and I want to, you're not going to get those kinds of accolades. Most days are going to probably suck. And that's really the reality of doing anything over a long term that you are committed to and taking seriously, is that the window of what you consider to be a successful, good day gets smaller because you're more precise and you understand what you're doing better. So it's like when you first start out, you could, maybe someone walks down the hall and says to you, oh, I really like that project, is really good. You did a really good job. And then that makes you feel really good. And you're like, that's a really good day. 3 months later, you realize this person that said this to you is an idiot. And they said that to everyone, and their accolades don't mean anything. And so you're like, whatever. And so that doesn't necessarily mean you've had a good day. And it's like the same thing with poker. And is that, maybe you're going in and you're having, every day you're sitting down, you're having a bunch of days where you're losing, or maybe you're breaking even. And that over the long run doesn't matter because your wins are bigger than your losses. But the day-to-day experience of that, to you as a human being processing that, is I've had more bad days than good days. And so his point in all of this was we filter our experiences through this kind of expectation that we're going to have a kind of positive or at least a kind of neutral experience, when in reality that's just not the way the world works, and it's not the way that any kind of professional career works. Just, maybe you can get a job that's like doesn't require any brain power whatsoever, and you're just doing the same thing every day, and maybe then you could have like a neutral to good day every day or something. But for anyone that is pursuing any kind of a job that requires, that challenges you, that requires you to do different tasks every day, which I think are most jobs, then it's just not going to be that positive.
Yeah. I think a lot of this is to do with like when we start playing a poker session, we show up with a hope that we're going to win, because it can go one of two ways. When you sit down to play, you're either going to have a winning session or a losing session. Okay, there's a small window of break-even sessions, but usually you're going to be down a couple of buy-ins or up a couple of buy-ins, right, when you go to play poker. And which one of those happens just has a very big impact on your mood, right? Like if you compare your mood when you've won 3 buy-ins to when you've lost 3 buy-ins, I'm sure it's extremely different, and it's the same for everybody. It's just the way it goes. And the only thing that I think we can do, and what I work on with my students, is really just changing the focus. We just need to like move away from the outcome focus as much as possible and try to control what we can control, which is like process-oriented goals. So you're never going to be able to do that fully. And in your case, Melissa, your brain's always going to be upset that you've not played a hand in 2 hours. Like sitting there doing nothing for 2 hours makes you feel like a useless idiot. You're just sat there doing nothing, folding. Your brain's forming a self-image of you being totally idle and being like, what are we doing? We're like wasting our time. We're just sat in this chair folding 8-3 off. This isn't fun. How can this be what poker's about? And so all that we can really do is, when we're getting ready to play a session, we can put in some kind of routine wherein we actually think, right, what's my job today? Like, what is my role? What am I going to focus myself towards? That's right, I'm going to just be this person on this conveyor belt, and hands are going to come my way, and when they come my way, I'm going to be totally attuned. I'm going to like put my best stamp on them and send them on down the conveyor belt. It's like the conveyor belt of Evie. I used to talk about this metaphor a lot. That's actually your job when you're playing poker, and that includes 0% acknowledgement of whether you're winning or losing currently. But nevertheless, it's impossible to get rid of like the awareness of how well you're doing. And so I really think it's just to do with results. It's to do with just being wired as a results-oriented creature in the first place. That makes it nearly impossible not to play badly when you're losing and play better when you're winning, and not to be in a much worse mood when you're losing than when you're winning, and also not to be superstitious. I just think we are to some extent always going to do that because of our direct wiring to use the immediate results of what's going on. It sucks. It really sucks for poker. I wish it was otherwise. I wish there was a magical antidote. There just isn't. You just have to keep putting yourself in the role of the conveyor belt operator. Spots come your way. What's my job for the next 10 seconds? Maybe we can't stay like that all day, but what if I can just focus and do the right thing for the next 10 seconds until the hand is over? That would be amazing. What if I did that 30 times today instead of 10? What if like 3 times as often I was able to be professional for the next 10 seconds? Now, if we go back to the ace queen hand where you were card dead and now you've hit the top pair and you know you should fold to this pot-sized donk bet from the recreational player that's only ever got trips, or usually only has trips, well, yes, you really, really want to call, and you're always going to want to call in this spot, and you can't stop wanting to call. That's not actually something that you can control right now. You don't have the willpower to not feel heightened emotions. We know that emotions grow when we don't have the willpower to suppress them and regulate them, right? That's how the brain works, right? I don't know exactly how it works, but that's how it works. So all you can do is say, right, imagine at the end of a run, you go running, right? We both like running. If you're at the end of the run and you want to finish your run, well, if you only have half a K left, I find that way easier psychologically than if you told me, Pete, you're feeling like dog shit. You're at the end of your run. You're half dead on your feet. Now you've got to run another 5K after this. I'd be like, well, shit, now I'm in a terrible mood. I have low motivation. I want to just give up and lie on the ground. But in this hand, what if you could say to yourself, imagine there's a window of time. There's like 10 or 15 seconds that I just have to be professional for another 10 or 15 seconds. And then I can fold and I can cry about it, or I can be unhappy. I can even like make a little jibe at Colin or whatever I want to do. Try not to. Colin's a good guy. Shout out Colin if you're listening to this. But
Colin's a great guy and a great dealer.
Great dealer as well. Yeah. Apart from when Melissa's card dead, of course, and is getting coolers.
He's terrible.
He's terrible.
Then he's a big problem. And I've talked to the management about Colin.
Yeah, he's a real thorn in your side when he does that. Colin, stop doing that. Just deal everyone a decent amount of cards. Be equitable. So yeah, what if we just try that then? In these spots as poker players, maybe we just can't do anything about the human condition, but we can at least like exert maximum effort and like drain the tank of willpower for the duration of a hand, and then recharge the batteries during downtime. I think what you do during your downtime as well is really important in live poker. It's like, how are you going to spend, if you're being dealt 30 minutes of shit where you're just having to fold, how will you spend those 30 minutes? Will you spend them getting progressively more worked up and impatient and restless, or will you find something to do with your brain that actually recharges you and keeps you fresh for the next spot?
Yeah. And I think that's good. That's good. I think that makes sense. The other thing that I find myself doing is reminding myself that this is part of poker. So this is something I have to deal with. This is it's not an anomaly. This isn't like some unusual situation. This is part of poker. So last weekend I played up at a casino in Washington State, and I was there actually for my birthday, and Friday night, like I had lost. I don't know, it was a weird session. I don't know if I could call myself, if I ran bad or not, but it was just a weird session and I lost. And so the next morning I woke up and I'm like, I'm going to get at it early today. And I went down there and it was like 11:30, and I sat down at just like a total old man coffee table. It was like the only table that was running at that point. And it was like the stereotypical old man coffee table. And it wasn't so much like the fact that I was card dead, but it was the fact that like the conversations around me that were happening were so difficult to even listen to, because the conversation was just awful. And I mean, my earpods only go up so loud, and like I have noise canceling, but it's like at a certain point you have to like turn it off so you can hear, like if you're in a hand, you can hear what's going on, whatever. But it was so difficult. And I thought to myself, like, I just want to get up and leave. But then I thought, well, my plan for today when I woke up was to play pretty much all day. Like I wanted to put in like a really solid day of play today. And I'm not leaving because I'm like, it doesn't feel like a good reason to leave. And the way that this casino is structured, like if I left, I'd probably have to wait a while. If I came back to get on another table, it would have been probably maybe a 2 or 3 hour kind of gap. And then I thought, well, I just have to deal with this. This is just like one of those things that you have to deal with. And like as you say, like my job today is to kind of deal with this table full of these guys that just happen to be hitting their cards against me in these totally gross spots, and then talking about how they knew exactly where they were at the whole time. They put me on my exact 2 cards. And then saying things like, so-and-so is a really good player. You shouldn't have tried to bluff him. So-and-so is a super solid da-da-da-da. And so-and-so is going to be playing at the World Series this year. And it's just like the worst possible conversation ever. And I stuck it out and played through, but it wasn't like a comfortable situation. It wasn't like there were other places I could have spent my Saturday that would have been far more beneficial to me.
Your mental health.
Emotionally.
Yeah.
Yeah, mental health. But I thought to myself, if I can endure this, that's a good thing. Like I can get through this. Like I'm not going to be defeated by this.
By George and Joseph.
Yeah, George and Joseph. It was like Stu, Stan. Yeah.
Stan's a classic. Stan's got a cowboy hat, like for sure. 100%.
Oh, it was really bad. And yeah. So anyways, I think that is an example of like enduring a situation that I think you can't, like it seems to me like there's certain things you can't run away from when you're playing regularly. Like
well, in anything, right?
in anything, right? Yeah.
Not just in poker, but that's the way of the world. There's like, I have to email the accountant about something that I'm really bored by and I find it super tedious and I have to sit for the next 2 minutes and I have to email the accountant. And I do that. I do things like that. But when I think about it now, I'm like, God, what an awful 2 minutes of my life. Like, I'd much rather be doing anything else. I'd rather just be like hoovering or doing the dishes or something. But then when I'm doing it, when it comes time to email the accountant, for those 2 minutes, my brain switches into a mode where it understands that its job for the next 2 minutes is to send that email. And it's not that bad, because once you assign something as your job, you probably get through it. Like, imagine when like the slaves were building the pyramids, right? Obviously, kind of a horrible life to be a slave and to have to build pyramids and lug stones about. But do you think all day they just went, this is so terrible. Oh my God, this is terrible. This is awful. Oh my God, I hate my life. Like, they probably did for large parts of the day, but there was probably a way that they survived. They probably had to teach themselves, my job is just to move this stone to there, and then I get water. And water is good and water feels nice, and then I'll feel a bit better, and that will be the highlight of my day. And that's horrible. That's fucking awful. And thank God we don't have slavery or anything like that anymore. But at the same time, no matter what the... I know, why do I have to make it clear that I'm not in favor of slavery when I give an example of this? It's ridiculous.
You're anti-slavery on this podcast.
Yes, just to be very clear. I'm not like, man, it would have been cool to be a slave. You'd have just been able to assign your job for the day to move that boulder. No, we're not saying that. But when we're put...
Poker Distilled has been canceled.
Of course.
Sorry to inform everyone.
So when we're put in these grueling situations, and it may be something like first world, like problems, like having to send an email, like God forbid, or it could be something much worse. But either way, we're able to adapt to that moment and say that my job for the next 2 minutes or the next hour or whatever is to do this thing that I'd rather not do. And you're sat with Joe and Stan and Charles, and they're all like, did you just try to bluff Stan? Stan's a solid player, miss. Let me tell you something, little miss. And they're like doing all this.
That's pretty much how it went. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. And then like you had to go through that, but when did that bother you, and when did it become easier? Here's the thing. It bothered you immensely up until the point where you said, wait, I see this as a job. I accept this job. It is now my role to fulfill the role of the person who does this job. And then you were like, well, I'm not enjoying myself, but I've consented in some way. You weren't resisting anymore. Anger, lashing out, moaning, whining, these are the opposite of consent. These are saying, no, I don't think this is okay. This shouldn't be happening to me. And going back to the slavery example, their life would have been way worse if they actually rebelled mentally for the entire time they had to do it, because they didn't have a choice, right? It was either that or be killed or whatever. It's horrific. They didn't have a choice. And you did have a choice there, but ultimately the overseer Melissa said to the other Melissas, like, no, the best thing for us to do here is this. This is what our heart's set on. I want to be, a poker player. This is what it entails. And then the you that was set at the table said, cool, I accept that job, even though I'd rather do other things. I accept that role. And then it wasn't as bad after that to deal with Stan, right? So maybe that's
I mean, that's pretty much how it went. And I think that we're capable of a lot that we don't realize. Like, I think we really are, like, as just human beings. And the example of like people who have been diagnosed with like a really serious disease, and from the outside, friends and family say, oh, that's terrible, I can't believe that happened to you, like, this is awful. And it is. But if you talk to people who have lived with debilitating diseases that it's been years. I'm thinking about this because I watched the documentary the other night on Michael J. Fox, the actor, and he's got like seriously, he's diagnosed with Parkinson's when he was like 28 years old, and he's like very serious case. He can't really sit still, but his mood is like very positive. And what's interesting is that for a lot of people, like, that's their world. So like they don't have there's no other option, right? It's not like I can turn off my Parkinson's disease and be able to sit still for a second, or I can turn off, whatever. If I'm paralyzed, I can like start using my legs again. It doesn't work that way. And I feel like our minds have a way of adapting to these circumstances. And after a while it becomes your new normal, and what is frustrating to you is things that are frustrating in your world
Yeah.
that are not, necessarily like other people would look at as like, no, the problem, for you is that you can't walk. And you're like, well, no, the problem for me is that I overslept this morning, and like now I'm late, and like my day's all, and really I think it's a survival mechanism that I think we have that is similar to maybe something like, you see this happening all the time where people are like, I can't imagine like how people lived before electricity, or I can't imagine like what it was like to like, what the world was like before cell phones.
We were
How did
happier.
people even, yeah.
We were
Well, like,
happier.
how did people
Yeah.
even know where you were? Like, how did people know what you were doing? Like, if you're going to go meet someone somewhere, how did you even know if they've arrived if you can't text them, blah, blah, blah.
Mhm.
And I think that it's a weird trick, because especially with technology, we get so accustomed to using that in our lives that we can't imagine anything different. But at the time, it's fine for that person. I mean, maybe it's not fine, but it's a situation that you've adapted to and you can live in. So like, bringing it back to poker, there is a version of myself out there, and I know I know she's out there, that can sit down at various tables with people who are, the old man coffee types, who are maybe even a little more abrasive, who are rude, who are nitty, who are blah blah blah, all of these things, and deal with it.
Imagine the dating profile of an old man coffee stan. Like, misogynistic, abrasive, grumpy, superstitious, and a pain to be around. Like, that's
and
basically
cheap,
it.
and just cheap. Yeah.
Cheap as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just like,
Oh God, that table was so bad. It was so bad. At one point, I put chips in the middle. I always like verbalize my bets, especially with old man coffee types. And so because like they're always like sticklers for the rules, and they'll try and take any edge possible, and they're always angling.
Yep.
So like I'll say 30, and then I'll take out my chips, and maybe I'll take a stack of 100 out, but then I'll count down 30 and pull the chips back. And I did that, and one of the guys was like, if you put 100 out there, that's the bet. And I was like, no, I verbalized 30. If you put 100 out there, that's the bet. No, I verbalized 30. And it's like, I was repeating to him that it was fine, and he just would not even accept that. It was so bad. It was just terrible. Anyways, there's a part of me that's like capable of conquering all of these things. Just like there's a part of me that when it comes to these like little superstitions, I'm in a weird way better than that. Like, I'm better than having to rely on routines that are based in kind of a kind of spiritual superstition, a kind of world of I mean, I hate to say like it's similar to atheism, but or being agnostic, but I do feel like a lot of like my favorite writing on atheism and agnosticism talks about how using religion or using the idea of a god or of an afterlife as a kind of crutch, or a kind of way of dealing with how shitty and terrible life can be, and the suffering that we're experiencing now. And my goal is to not have crutches. My goal is to be strong enough to make my way through the world or through a session without crutches. And that's kind of where I think that's kind of where this all ends up.
And that's brave, like being able to say, I want to be okay in my bad sessions. I want to be strong enough such that when variance basically destroys me and I suffer a really bad session, I can face that adversity and still be okay and play relatively well. Maybe not my A game, but I can keep it together. That's much, much braver, going back to our whole bravery, courage topic that we talked about back in the day on Poker Distilled, than going, well, if I can just win a pot and get a good session, then I can maybe start playing well. Like, I actually know a lot of students like that. They're kind of glass cannons. I'm like this myself, where if I'm playing a session and I'm running really badly and I'm also just not in a strong frame of mind, let's say like I wake up in a particular day and for some reason I'm just more irritable, I've had a bad night's sleep, let's say, or whatever, sit down and start playing, lose a few stacks, I can feel myself thinking, it would take far too much willpower right now to play well, given what's going on. So I'm going to
Mm.
do what's expedient and easy. I'm going to play badly because I want to, because that's like throwing the toys out the pram, lashing out, playing badly, bemoaning reality instead of accepting it and adjusting. And then I have this thing at the back of my brain going, man, if you could start winning, like maybe I'll win a couple of stacks back. I'll be like, man, if you start winning, you could start playing your A game because you'd feel like you were motivated enough to do it. And that's really sad. And I've been in this state sometimes during sessions. I know students who have that can only ever play well if there's no adversity. And that to me is like needing some divine miracle to play well. And it's not exactly what you're saying about atheism and theism, but it's somewhat linked. That if you need a miraculous form of variance or you need very positive variance in order to play well, most of the time you'll be playing badly. So this player that you talked about earlier who had more losing sessions than winning sessions, it wouldn't surprise me one bit if that wasn't all just random variance patterns and some of it was actually when he was playing badly, he was actually playing for when he was losing, he was playing for a long time and playing badly, and when he was winning, he was playing really well. Like he was only unlocking that A game when he was playing really well. And then what you have is every time you're running average or nothing special, you actually play badly. You might even be a losing player, but when you're playing well, you're such a winning player that it doesn't matter. I do think that like people have all kinds of different versions of themselves that exist from day to day. I do think like the spectrum of how well one of my students plays on a given day, it can be very wide ranging. You can have a guy that's struggling at 25 NL, but actually his A game would beat 100 NL. He just very rarely plays it. Like that's not uncommon because of mental game issues.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, that was one of, I think, the problems that I had, and I don't think I've totally cured it, but I would have these really wide swings between my A game and, you know, something like a D or F game. And I was just like, I was at these like extreme polar opposite ends of this spectrum of like play. And I remember when we first started like working together, you were like identifying that. You're like, you know, you have these sessions where like you're playing really well, and then you have these sessions where like everything just falls apart, and there is just these extremes. So yeah, I can totally relate to that, and I think I was at the extreme end of that for sure.
Yeah, I remember when I first started working with you, and I remember thinking like, God, like she's really good. I'm so like excited that she's going to be a fantastic player one day. Like this is really exciting. She thought through that hand so amazingly well, and I would leave our sessions sometimes thinking, cool, yeah, that went really well. I've got a lot of hope. And then I would see some of the hands that you brought the next day, and I'd be like, was I wrong about her level? Like maybe she was just lucky the other day when she got all that stuff right. Like that must have been because now her level's like really low. Oh shit, like I've really misevaluated this. Then the next day I'd be like, why is she just nailed like 3 spots again? Like I don't understand. It was like there were 2 people. It was like that episode of like
I have a twin.
Yeah, like you have a twin. It's like an episode of some sitcom where you've like cloned yourself, and like there's a clone that's good at poker and a clone that's bad at poker, and one of them just like you're just messing with me. Like one shows up every day, and like each day you take turns.
that would be really that would be incredible if that were true. But it's not.
But then we closed that gap, and like now I definitely agree that you're much more consistent, and now you're ranging between, you know, like on a regular basis, let's say B and C game rather than A and F. Like that's really stabilizing when you reach that point. So it's good.
Yeah. No, I think so. And I think that it's I mean, so much of it for me is this ideal player that I have in my head, and I'm always trying to like move toward that player. And like you know, one of the things that like Nietzsche said about like ego, or not ego, but like envy is, you know, most people like they, you know, you're watching TV or you know, you see someone driving down the road in a really nice car, or, you know, something triggers something in you, and you're like, oh, I really want that. Or that's something that would be really good for me to have, you know, that I think the kind of like normie response to that is you have to control your, you know, you have to control your envy, and you can't be envious of other people's things, and you can't covet things. And that's kind of like a very kind of like historically like Christian like worldview, is like, don't covet what your neighbor has, kind of thing. But like Nietzsche's approach to it was like, well, no, that's telling you where you want to go. Like that's giving you a path. So like, it's not a bad thing to want things. It's not you don't have to scold yourself for feeling envious of what other people have. You don't have to be, you know, angry at yourself for feeling like there's a better world out there and there's better things that you can achieve and that you're capable of better things. That's actually showing you the roadmap to where you need to go in a way. And I feel like with poker, I have a path that I want to go, and I have a version of myself that is on that path. And when I'm running bad, or I'm playing, mainly when I'm playing bad, when I'm making mistakes, when I'm playing that C game, the tilt or the frustration comes from not pursuing, like not getting that, you know. So it's like the I guess the analogy would be like you want a car or something, and like you're like, okay, I finally saved up enough money, and then you go and you realize like the price has been increased, or it's been sold, or whatever, like it's been pulled out of your grasp, and you're like, that's where I'm supposed to go, why can't I get there? I'm falling off the path. And so it's more frustration with myself and with not fulfilling what I know is like my potential. And that I think is I think it's healthy in a way to like have those goals and to want something better, and to be envious of players that are really successful, and to be envious of players that, you know, maybe you run into and you think are really good players and are, you know, successful and making money and all of these things. And I think like, yeah, that's okay.
Yeah, I think it's like, when does envy become jealousy as well? Because if envy like sort of morphs and mutates into something that's more like, oh, I have resentment towards this person for having something that I don't have. They shouldn't have that. I should have it. They don't deserve it. That's beginning to become quite unhealthy. Although even that would have had its place like in the tribe. Like if we go back to our ancestry, probably envying something or being jealous of another tribe and feeling animosity towards them for their resources helped the tribe extinguish the other tribe and take the resources, which is a brutish, like Hobbesian way of seeing society. But it's very much like what would have happened like back in the day. As we look at chimpanzees, we've talked about chimpanzees many times for some reason on this podcast. They behave in that way very much, right? So I do think that there is utility in envy, especially, and even in jealousy. Maybe not anymore in the world in jealousy so much, but there would have been some kind of like brutish utility to it back in the day. I think with envy, there's always utility, and I don't really know the exact definitions of these words, but just for the audience's sake and for yours, actually, what I mean by envy is more like seeing something and wanting it, whereas by jealousy, I mean like feeling animosity towards something because they have something and you don't. So I think with envy, it's just like, if like what that means to us as humans is, well, if Phil Galfond has all this money from playing PLO, well, that must mean that it's possible for a human, because I'm a human like Galfond is, I can therefore make a lot of money playing PLO, maybe, if I do everything right. And then now that's inspiring. Now I have a reason to get up off my ass and go and do some work on my PLO game, because someone has shown me that that's possible. So wanting something that others have is really sensible, actually, because imagine I said to you, Melissa, I'm really down today. And you're like, oh, what's wrong, Pete? How can I help? Which is what you would say, obviously, because you're caring and nice.
I'm a caring person.
Right.
Yeah.
And then I said, I'm really annoyed that I don't own Neptune, like the planet. I'm really sad that like I don't have it. You know, that would be like highly impractical to want that. Like every drop of energy I spent desiring to be the owner of Neptune and to have dominion over Neptune would actually just be counterproductive, and it would drive me insane, right? And I don't want Neptune, because even if Neptune was a good place to own, it's not. It's like a cold gas planet with like, I think it's a gas planet. It doesn't have much going on. It's like in the outer realms of the solar system. But even if it was good, like no one has it, and so I have no reason to believe that it's possible to obtain it, and so I don't think about it. But like when I see a human being make 100k a year playing poker, and I'm an aspiring poker player that's just started out, and I see that graph and I see that it's possible to have a flat red line, or I see that it's possible to make 6 figures, well, suddenly, yes, I might experience a twang of, oh, I want what they've got, if only I was them. Oh man, that's so frustrating. But that's a drive. That's like, wait a minute, humans like me can obtain that if they do the right things. Therefore now I'm charged and I have a reason to do the right thing. Yeah, I'm with Nietzsche in this one. I think envy has a real practical application for sure.
Yeah, and this happens at the table. This can happen in a session, where you see someone with a lot of chips, right? And the natural response sometimes is, well, I want a lot of chips, and that person is doing something right to get those chips, and it's like, then you see them play a hand and you realize that they're terrible. And this has been they're on some kind of sun run and they're just getting every card. And, it's like, and they don't even may not even understand. Most people wouldn't even understand that they're actually getting lucky. They just think this is kind of supposed to happen. This is how poker works. And I've been in those situations where I find myself feeling jealousy toward that person, because it's not so much I wish I had what they had. It's I wish I ran that good, or that person always runs so good. They don't deserve it. They're a shitty player. Like they're just on the right side of variance. And you know what? They may be on the right side of variance for the rest of their poker life, and I may be on the wrong side of variance for the rest of my poker life. Like that's possible. That could happen. And I'm not saying these are rational thoughts by any means. I'm just saying that when you allow jealousy to creep, when you allow it to take over the kind of envy, then it can totally ruin your thought process and become another weight that I think is very similar to superstition, in the sense that, well, why am I jealous of this person? Well, because they're luckier than me. Okay. You don't know anything about that person. You don't know if they're up or down on the session. You don't know what they're, whether they're up or down lifetime. You don't know anything. It's just what you're seeing at this moment. This happened to me last weekend when I sat down at this table and this guy had like a massive amount of chips for the game. This was like a 1-3 game. And I think he had like 4K in front of him. It was just freaking ridiculous. And he was like, so, I mean, he wasn't a terrible player, but he wasn't someone that was like, had a skill edge on the game. It was clear after a while of playing with him. But I feel like when it comes to envy, like, yes, it is very important to understand that envy is a roadmap in a lot of ways, but you have to also understand that things like jealousy can creep in, can destroy that roadmap, and that, it's really important to kind of separate those two things. So I would agree with what you're saying.
Definitely. But like an absolute absence of envy must in some sense be a lack of ambition. Like I would go as far to say that. Like if you look at someone who's made, let's say I look at someone who's a poker coach that's made 2 million this year from the poker coaching industry, right? And my company doesn't turn over that much, right? So I would love to turn over 2 million. I don't. I look at them and I think, oh, well, that's fine. I'm never gonna, I'm not bothered by that. Of course I'm bothered by that. I look at like coaches that are making more than me. Like if I get wind of like a coaching company that's doing way better than mine, or like I look to one of the giant poker coaching companies and I'm like, yeah, I want that. Of course I do. And that's healthy, because like always wanting to grow, that's the very drive that like got me to go from like just an independent coach doing like fairly cheap lessons for really low stakes players back in the day to setting up Carrot Corner and doing a lot better for myself. And it was being able to look at people that made more, not necessarily as poker players, that too, but also just people who made more from the poker industry, and being like, well, if they can do it, I'm pretty smart. They're a smart human, but I think I'm also a pretty smart human. I can probably do that as well. That's interesting. I'm going to go after that thing that they've got. I want that. It's not that I want to take that from them. It's just that I think it's now more likely that I can have it because I've seen that they have it. And I think this is the utility of envy, as I said. Yeah. I'm probably repeating myself here, but I think it's an
No.
Really
I think that's, it deserves to be repeated. I think it's so important. The best advice I've ever received is that you can do anything you want. And by that, I mean, it's not like you can buy Neptune, right?
God damn it. I was just about to ask that. Can I have Neptune?
I don't know why you want Neptune. That'd be the worst. That's like the like crappiest of the planets.
No.
I feel like there's better.
Well,
I don't know. All of them are, you can't even inhabit, so it doesn't matter.
Well, if you had Jupiter, like it's way too big, it's totally impractical. You'd never be able to look after Jupiter. Like it would just be too much maintenance.
That's true. I was listening to a science podcast the other day, and I didn't realize this, but I was talking to my husband about it, and he was like, everyone knows this, but if the sun, because of how the speed of light, if the sun burnt out, like just like turned off, we wouldn't even know about it for like 10 minutes.
Yeah, 8 minutes.
Because it would take that long for the sun, for the rays to get here. So we would have 10 minutes of living without a sun. I think it'd be an interesting novel to set it in those 10 minutes That'd be like a
Yeah, it's
a
like
good setting for a book.
it's a very big distance. So like the light gets
It
sent
is.
and it's on transit, and then suddenly you run out
Yeah.
of light, right? You just run out.
Yeah.
So
It's like we were like, oh, the light just went out. It's like, no, it went out 10 minutes ago. Like you guys have been living in
mhm,
10 minutes of like borrowed time without a sun. Um,
mhm,
so I think that, yeah, so the best advice is like you can do anything in the sense that there really is so much achievable in this world that is and again, I'm not talking about like becoming a movie star or something or becoming a billionaire, but I do think there's so much more available that we realize that we then we're capable of kind of discerning. And part of like being someone that's like not old, like is you feel yourself, like sometimes we're overwhelmed with the possibility, right? And in order to deal with that overwhelming experience, we kind of put blinders on and
yeah,
we're like, okay, this is what's available to me. This is my career. This is my family. This is like my life. It's like doing this, doing that. I'm old, this is my age. This is how much money I have in my bank account. This is kind of what I'm capable of. This is my world.
yeah,
And that's totally not true. It's not true in any way whatsoever. Like we're capable of wonderful, amazing things. I mean, it takes work, it takes sacrifice, it takes all of these things, struggle, suffering, but we're capable of great things. But you just have to pursue them and you have to be serious about it. And I truly believe that. And I think that the reason I brought up the age thing is because I read a quote from a film director the other day, and who's like very old. He's Martin Scorsese. He's like very famous, but he says that he's 80 something years old. And he said the tragedy of being old is you realize how much more there is to do. How much more, like for him, it was like, the art of filmmaking is there's so much more I could have done with it. There's so much more I can still do with it, but I don't have that much time left. And I feel like that's kind of like a tragedy, but you realize that when it's too late. And
mhm,
so all of that is I'm saying all of that because I feel like superstition is a way of not only putting blinders on ourselves, but like of making the blinders even worse. It's seeing a kind of short-term, very blinkered version of the world when there's so much more out there. There's so many more rings on the tree of possibility, on so many more branches that we can partake in.
yeah. I know I'm doing that in a major way right now in my life, where I'm like pretty happy with things, keep the business moving along as it is. There's so many more things, both inside and outside of work, that I know I could do, but I'm just like, at some point I'll start branching out and doing other things. And then like years and years roll by and you stay within your own little cocoon, your own little playground. And then eventually you reach Scorsese's age and you realize that like, yeah, there's not much time left. And it's a kind of harrowing prospect. But yeah, this has been a really interesting conversation. How about we move on to Pete versus Troll? And the sad thing about this is that I don't think anyone trolled me this week. I don't remember reading
Someone trolled me. You showed me someone trolled me.
Melissa versus
The
versus
doorbell
Troll.
thing.
Okay, Melissa
Yeah.
versus Troll it is then. But what a week where I don't get trolled. Like, what is that about? I'm actually offended. I'm actually hurt. Troll me more, guys.
Maybe because you started this segment, people are afraid of being called out. Maybe you've defeated the trolls.
Easy. Yeah. I mean, we're on a 1 week streak of not being trolled. Let's see how many weeks we get. I doubt we'll get to. Okay, Melissa versus Troll. You were trolled by someone who said, if your doorbell scares you, why don't you just get a new doorbell? This is brutal.
Yeah.
How do you
It
respond
is
to this?
brutal. Well, and it's unnecessary, and it's personal, and it's like if you want to leave a comment about poker, that's fine. But like when you bring it to like a personal level like that, like it's nasty. I think it's one of the reasons why like more women don't play poker is because of shit like that. And also I feel like the arrogance to think I just have the ability to go out and get a new doorbell.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't even know how that works. I didn't even know doorbells could be replaced. I thought like you you move in somewhere, like that's your doorbell, like that's your lot in life. It's like you're born into this. And so I'm shocked, I'm appalled. I'm glad you gave me that person's screen name, because I've contacted the rightful authorities. They've been reported, and I'm recovering. I'm okay.
Good.
But
yeah, it was a horribly misogynistic, oppressive assault.
terrible.
on a minority in poker.
Exactly. And it's like doorbells too. It's like, how much privilege can you have to just be like, oh, like get a new doorbell? It's like,
yeah, like do you know how doorbells are wired, or are you going to call an engineer? You're going to call an engineer, so you're going to pay someone to come into your house and replace your doorbell. Like, these people just must be so rich. Like, they must.
And it's so rich. It's like I can't even imagine. Like, I don't even know where to ask for a new doorbell. That's actually true.
Yellow Pages. We have this book in the UK called the Yellow Pages. And
really,
yeah, you look things up, and it's like you have to go through like 600-700 pages, but eventually if you look under like doorbell, you might find a doorbell company, and then you have to phone them, and then you have to get the guy to come out and like change the doorbell for you. But it's horrendous. It's an absolutely horrifying, grueling thing to do. Yeah.
It's a traumatizing experience.
Yeah,
to have to call Don's doorbells.
I think you were playing with Don the other night with the guy with the cowboy hat. I think that's Don of Don's doorbells. Yeah.
Like, what do you do outside of poker? I run a doorbell company.
I run a doorbell business, sweetie.
I've been in the doorbell industry for such long that you've been alive.
Yeah,
I've heard every doorbell chime there is.
Yeah, there's definitely some doorbell puns in here, but I can't quite think of them right now.
Well, with that, I think we should wrap it up. We've gone way too long. I hear the bell is ringing for us to end.
Yeah.
But this has been a good podcast. I think we more or less stayed on topic, but I hope that this was interesting to you guys. If you enjoy this podcast, if you're liking what you're hearing, please like and subscribe on Spotify, or iTunes, wherever you get your quality podcasts from. We've had some nice reviews and some nice thumbs up on Spotify, or stars, I guess they're stars, which is really cool. It helps us a lot, helps the podcast. And we're hoping to stick out and to rise above the sea of mediocre poker podcasts out there, and take our rightful place at the top, which we are envious of and we deserve.
And it's right for us to be envious of it, because otherwise we wouldn't be inspired to ask you guys for ratings, and then we wouldn't get ratings, and Melissa would not be able to ever afford a new doorbell. And on that note, we will see you next time on Poker Distilled.